With various firsts in her already impressive career, the Emmy-nominated actress, documentary film producer, and prominent equal rights advocate Laverne Cox continues to make history on her career and significant strides in her activism. Debuting on the scene in the groundbreaking role of Sophia Bursette in the critically acclaimed Netflix original series Orange is the New Black, Laverne is the first trans woman of color to have a leading role on a mainstream scripted television show. Laverne has earned numerous honors and awards for her work in advocacy. She is the first out trans person to be featured on the cover of Time magazine and Cosmopolitan. The first openly trans person to be nominated for an Emmy in an acting category, twice. And to have a wax figure at Madame Tussauds. She holds 2 Screen Actor Guild Awards for her work with the ensemble of Orange is the New Black. And she is the first transgender person to win a Daytime Emmy for producing the documentary Laverne Cox Presents the T-Word. An advocate with an empowering message of moving beyond gender expectations to live more authentically, she has also been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, one of Glamour magazine's 2014 Women of the Year, one of the Grio's 100 most influential African Americans, among other accolades. Laverne is currently involved in developing several projects, most notably a documentary entitled Disclosure, Trans Lives on Screen. As she continues to be a major voice driving transgender awareness and equality, Laverne's message continues to resonate with audiences and drive positive change on a global scale. It is my distinct honor to welcome the 2019 Pitzer College Commencement speaker, Laverne Cox.
Pitzer College, graduating class of 2019. How are you feeling today? Thank you so much, President Oliver, for that wonderful introduction. To the trustees, to the faculty and staff, to the families, the parents, and to the graduating class of 2019, I am so incredibly overjoyed and honored to be here today. Oh, yes. I have to say that I am so incredibly moved by all of the speakers who have come onto this stage today, and I'm just so inspired by your engagement in the world, Pitzer students. I'm so incredibly inspired, and I've learned so much just listening. Now I have to tell you that I have agonized over what I would say to you today. Today, as you transition from one part of your life to the next part of your life. And what kept coming up for me over and over again is a passage from Bell Hooks' book, Yearning, Race, Gender, and Cultural Politics. Do we know Bell Hooks here, some of us? It's Pitzer, of course you know Bell Hooks. And there's a moment in Yearning where Bell Hooks says, language is also a place of struggle. I was just a young girl coming slowly into womanhood when I read Adrienne Rich's words. This is the oppressor's language, yet I need it to speak to you. Language is also a place of struggle. Dare I speak to oppressed and oppressor in the same voice? Dare I speak to you in a language that moves beyond the boundaries of domination, a language that does not bind you, fence you in, or hold you. Language is also a place of struggle. The oppressed struggle in language to recover ourselves, to reconcile, to reunite, to renew. Our words are not without meaning. They are an action, a resistance. Language is also a place of struggle. This quote from Bell Hooks always takes me to this place where I think critically about language and the struggle for language and finding the words to express what I'm feeling, what I think, and what I believe, and how language often falls short. I was reminded of that this week on Twitter, of all places. Earlier this week, I was on Twitter finding out more information about what was going on in Alabama. Now, most of you know that I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Did you know that? Anybody from Mobile, Alabama, or Alabama, period, in the house? I see some hands. There is some Alabama in the house, yes. So this week, we all know what happened in Alabama, that the most restrictive anti-abortion law was passed there this week. And I was trying to, boo, we can boo for that. And I was so upset and overwhelmed by what was going on in my home state, and I was trying to figure out what I should say, if anything, on social media. And I was scrolling through my timeline, and I saw my dear friend Michael Skolnick's words, which said, "A woman's body, a woman's choice, end of story." And I was so overwhelmed, and I didn't know what I wanted to say, and so I retweeted what Michael said, and then I went and read some more about what was going on and watched some more coverage, and a few hours later, I went back to Twitter and saw that someone had responded to my retweet. And they basically said, essentially, "Laverne, how are you going to retweet this and erase your trans brothers?" They basically said that, you know, women and people who identify as women are not the only people who are affected by anti-abortion laws, that people who identify as women are not the only people who get pregnant. And we can applaud for that. It's the truth. But I have to tell you, my first reaction to the tweet was not to applaud. My first reaction to the tweet was, I felt just a feeling in my body, that a sense of uncomfortability, a little anxiety, and I immediately became defensive. And so what I've learned about myself when I feel defensive, when I have that feeling, is that I have to get curious when I feel defensive. Because if I feel defensive, something is going on. So as I got curious and began to explore what was going on, first of all, I was made really uncomfortable. I was being sort of called out on Twitter, and that's like a really uncomfortable thing. And, you know, I have a few followers on Twitter. And so people were gonna see it. And so I felt uncomfortable because of that. And then I kept thinking, and I was like, I said to myself, can we just have a moment where we keep this simple? There's so much going on in the world right now, and it is so complicated. Can we just keep it simple right now? People don't want to be thinking about, like, trans people, and particularly trans men having babies. Can we just, like, keep it simple right now? That's another thing that came to mind. And another thing was, can we have a moment for women? For women to be in solidarity with each other? Can I just be in solidarity with my sisters on this issue? Do we have to, like, make it about all of the complicated, you know, nuances of the issue? And then I also thought, we really don't need the mainstream America to be thinking about transgender men specifically, pregnant and having babies. That's really not going to advance the cause of transgender people. All of these things went through my mind, and I was like, okay, I was still uncomfortable, and I still didn't know what quite to say or respond to the person who tweeted me. So I said, thank you so much for bringing up this issue. I'm still processing. And as I continued to process, I thought, for the first time, what if I were a transgender man? What if I were a transgender man, someone assigned male at birth, but who lived and identified as, who was assigned female at birth, I should say, and who lived and appeared to be male and identified as male, and for whatever reason, I became pregnant unintentionally. what if I were that transgender man? And all of the language that was being talked about around abortion rights talked about women. And healthcare facilities were making policies and implementing practices that were all about women. And I find myself, a trans man, all of a sudden pregnant unintentionally. And all the language and all of the policies and everything that's been designed is about people who identify as women. And then if I have to terminate that pregnancy and I go to a healthcare facility and am presenting as someone who appears to be male, who identifies as male, and the healthcare practitioners have no understanding, no idea of how to handle this situation. If I were that trans man, I would really want to have language that incorporated and included my experience. Thinking about this reminded me that language is also a place of struggle, but that this isn't just about being politically correct. This is not just about virtue signaling, that when we use language that excludes groups of people on pertinent issues, it can jeopardize their health and well-being. Language that is appropriate and fully inclusive is a matter of life and death for so many people out there. And it really is, for me, as a trans woman, I can't get pregnant. I'm very grateful for that. But it's an issue that I don't actually have to think about. And when we don't have to think about and deal with something in our own lives, that is an incredible privilege. But if we are the person who has to deal with the issue, it is so important to be inclusive and to have our issues dealt with. And so what this brought up for me is that as you go out into the world, you're going to be faced with a lot of difficult decisions, a lot of things that will make you uncomfortable, that are complicated and nuanced issues, and sometimes you might just want to keep it simple and just focus on, can we focus on this part of the issue right now and just leave this out, leave this group of people out. And what I would like to remind you of today is that when we are leaving people out, we are not really doing the work to be inclusive. And I have to tell you that, I'm Laverne Cox, and for many, many years, I have been going around the country and getting on social media and on television sometimes and saying that when we have conversations about gender equity and we do not include transgender people, we are not really having the conversation in an inclusive way. And so Laverne Cox, who's been preaching this for many, many years and who feels like and thought that I was aware on this issue, I had a moment of saying, let's keep it simple. Can we not complicate this issue right now? And so, no matter how enlightened or informed or woke we might think we are, there is still a lot of work that we're going to have to do to make sure that we are really considering everyone's perspective, and that is a very difficult thing to do. So much, I was so excited when I heard a student earlier say that it's so important to listen. And in this process of leaning into discomfort, that plane is really loud. In our process of leaning into discomfort, it is really, really crucial that we also listen to ourselves and listen to our bodies. For the past 3 years, I've been engaged in a process called somatic therapy. Does anyone know about what somatic therapy is? Yeah. It is a trauma-based form of therapy that deals with trauma in the body and really moving the trauma out of the body. Somatic has to do with the body, and our work is based on the community resiliency model, which I heard reference to earlier as well. And so a lot of my work to heal from trauma is about listening to my body, because trauma, whether we think we're over something or not, lives in the cells of our body, lives in our nervous system. And so it's really, really crucial when we are doing trauma work to heal through the body. Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement. Do we know Tarana Burke, some of us here? in her TED Talk, she contends that we are collectively traumatized right now as a culture as a result of the reckoning that is happening around sexual assault in this country. And I contend that we're collectively traumatized about a whole slew of things that are happening in this world and in our country right now. And if we are collectively traumatized, I often ask myself, how do we collectively heal? What does that healing look like and feel like? And so much of the community resiliency model is about finding resilient, living in resiliency and in a resilient zone. My therapist always sort of does this thing when I'm in therapy, where she does this, and this is like the middle, and it's our resilient zone. And above that, we're in the high zone, and below that, we're in the low zone. The low zone is depression and sort of feeling suicidal, not wanting to get out of bed. The high zone is when we're sort of in a heightened state, when we are stressed out, or if we feel like we're in a threat of some kind. When we are in fight, flight, or freeze, for example, we're in a heightened state. And so much of our work is, in the somatic work, is to stay in our resilient zone and to become aware of when we're being bumped out of that zone. And something I learned recently about that resiliency that I want to share with you is that if one person can exist in their resilient zone, we can grow that resiliency in relationship to each other. So we have to heal in relationship to each other. We can't just heal by ourselves. So if we exist in our resilient zone and then share that resiliency with other people, we can begin to grow that resiliency and grow those spaces of healing. Mary Pfeiffer, in her book, Reviving Ophelia, has this amazing quote that I love to think about when I think about this collective process of healing and collective change. She tells us that social change is 1 million individual acts of kindness, and cultural change is 1 million subversive acts of resistance. Leaning into what is uncomfortable, finding ways to stay in our resiliency zone and share that, those are acts of resistance in this culture, because I think we are so often drawn to be in a space of reaction to everything and to be outraged. And there are a lot of things to be outraged about, but that is not sustainable for our nervous systems. What is going on right now is not sustainable. And Brene Brown says that shame, and we're living in a shaming culture, and this blame can rise only so far before people disengage. And part of being collectively traumatized is that sometimes we just have to shut down because it's way too much. And so then the healing is about leaning into that discomfort and finding ways to heal together. Now, another therapist of mine said this thing to me years ago that I want to share with you. And she said that the only things that we can control are our perception and our behavior. That's all we can control. We can't control what someone else is going to do or say, but we can control our perception and our behavior. Our behavior, what we do, and our perception, how we frame our experiences. And for many, many years, I framed my experience in relationship specifically to age as failure. And this is something I just started talking about this year because in the space of doing this work and owning my story, there's, you guys know I'm a transgender woman, right? And for many, many years, it was very difficult for me to fully own being trans. When I transitioned and started my medical transition in 1998, trans people really weren't open about being trans. The idea of transitioning 21 years ago was that you would transition and live as the gender you were meant to be and just never, ever tell anyone. And that was the goal for me when I transitioned, to just live as a woman and never tell people that I was trans. But 2, 3 years into my transition, I would still walk down the street and people would still misgender me. People would look at me and call me a man, and I lived in New York City at the time, and so every time I walked out of my house, I experienced a tremendous amount of harassment. I would be misgendered on the street, in the subway, a deli, everywhere. I was harassed, I was kicked on the street once. I experienced a tremendous amount of violence and street harassment being a recognizably trans person. And that was extremely, extremely difficult for me. And I felt like a failure. I felt like a failure. Here I was, I had finally accepted who I was. I took steps to live more authentically in the gender that I knew that I was, and the world was not reflecting that back to me. I felt like a failure. I just felt like I didn't want to live, and it was really difficult. Life is not easy for anyone, but every time you walk out of your house and you have to deal with harassment, with people calling you out of your name and possibly experiencing violence, I got to a point where I just didn't want to live. And so there was one moment when I figured, okay, this is what I can do. I figured out how I was gonna kill myself. I'm not gonna tell you what I was gonna do because I don't wanna encourage that. But when I figured out what I was going to do to kill myself, I typed up little notes. And the note said, my name is Laverne Cox. I should not be referred to by any other name. My preferred gender pronouns are she, or I should not be referred to by any other pronouns. And when I killed myself, I was going to have that note in either pocket, and I was going to have the note in several different places in my apartment so that I would not be misgendered in my death the same way I was being misgendered and disrespected on a daily basis in my life. And it was a really low point for me. I remember printing the notes and putting them around and contemplating how I was going to do this and when I was going to do it. And I'm honestly not sure what kept me from committing suicide way back then. I think part of it is that I found a new acting coach, named Susan Batson, and her process, her acting process gave me a new lease on life. And when I discovered her, she imparts in all of her students that acting can be this art form that can change the world if we do the work to create walking, talking human beings and to tell human stories that can shift the molecules in the world. And I think because I discovered her and I became incredibly committed to her process and becoming an artist, that kept me from taking my own life. Art has consistently been this thing that has lifted me up and saved me throughout my life. And as I stand here before you today, I am so grateful that I did not commit suicide back then, because I understand. Now I understand that I am here for a divine purpose. And I believe that each and every one of you is here for a divine reason. And it may take you a little time to figure out exactly what that is. I thought I knew. You know, when I moved to New York City in 1993, I was a dance major at Marymount Manhattan College, and I was going to graduate in a few years. And I figured, you know, in 3 years, 4 years tops, I'd be a superstar. And yeah, I thought that's what it was been. And it did not happen. 3 or 4 years later, I was living in New York City, waiting tables, and dealing with all my gender stuff. I had been in denial about who I was most of my life. When I was in 3rd grade, a lot of you know this story, my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Ridgway, called my mother on the phone and said, "Your son is going to end up in New Orleans wearing a dress if we don't get him into therapy right away." And the therapy that I went to after Miss Ridgway's pronouncement, the reparative therapy that I went through as a 3rd grader, and Miss Ridgway and my mother and all the kids who bullied me in school made me internalize so much shame about the feminine creature that I was. And I was running far, far, far away from ever ending up in New Orleans wearing a dress. Or so I thought. And it really wasn't until I moved to New York City years later and met real-life transgender women and got to know those transgender women and as people that I was able to begin to let go of the shame I'd internalized, the internalized transphobia I had, to begin my medical transition over 21 years ago. I've always believed if we can get to know people who are different from us, get to know those people as people, all of the misconceptions that we might have about people who are different from us will melt away, and we can accept them and ultimately learn to accept ourselves better. That has been my story. But so I internalized all the shame about being trans that I had to work through over and over again, because I had to work through the shame to transition, and then once I transitioned and I wasn't being read as a non-trans person, I had to work through the shame of not being read as a cisgender or non-transgender person on the street, and I had to work through that. And one of the awesome things about having worked through that is today I can stand before you and say that I am not a failure if someone can look at me and see that I'm a transgender person, because trans is beautiful. I am not beautiful despite my big hands, my big feet, my wide shoulders, my deep voice. I'm beautiful because of those things. But the process of here has not been easy. A pivotal moment happened for me in 2010 when I found a class in New York City, an acting class called Act Out, which was started by a visionary acting teacher named Brad Calcaterra. The class still exists in New York if you want to go and check it out. And Act Out is an acting class that Brad started for LGBTQ plus actors to work on our stuff. He, as an openly gay man himself, had never been in an acting class in all of his decades of studying where he had done a scene with another man. He never got to deal with his sexuality in an acting class. And what you should understand about acting is that we aren't really pretending, I guess we're sort of pretending to be other people, but what actors do is we have to go into the depths of who we are, own the depths of who we are, and give those truths to our character. We have to know our truths so intensely and so deeply so that we can give those truths to our character. And if we are in denial about any aspect of who we are, if we have shame about any aspect of who we are, that stifles our artistry. That style impulse. An actor has to be able to be in the moment and act on impulse. That is what acting is, reacting. And if you are an LGBTQ plus person in your entire life, if you were assigned male at birth and you reached for pink, or you wanted to play with a doll and your hand was slapped away, you learn very early on that if you reach for something that you like and that you feel drawn to, that you have to quash that impulse. So much of the work that I did with Brad was realigning my impulses so that I would not have shame about what I wanted to reach for, how I wanted to behave or live in the world. And that class really made everything that came after possible. Now, when I moved to New York in 1993, I figured, by 96, 97 tops, I'd be a superstar, I'd be world famous, and everyone would know me. It turns out it took about 20 years. Yeah, it took about 20 years. So in 2012, something intense happened. It was 7 years ago this month, on May 29th, I had a pivotal birthday, and I turned 40. I turned 40 years old. And I gotta tell you, saying that out loud is still a very intense thing for me to do. Forever 21 is not just a store. It was my life for many years. Funny story, in 2010, the New York Times came to Brad's acting class to interview some of the students, and the New York Times is gonna do a feature on the Act Out class. And, Eric Piepenberg interviewed me, and he was talking, he's like, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm over 21. And he said, no, I need to know how old you are. And I said, "It's not about how old I am, it's about how old I can play." He was like, "Okay." And then we did the interview. And a few weeks later, he calls back, and he's like, we have to do some fact checking, you know. It's not fake news, they fact check. And we have to do some fact checking, and he said, we really need to know how old you are. And I said, I'm over 21. It's not how old I am, it's about how old I can play. I'm an actress. I'm black, and I'm transgender, and I will not deal with ageism on top of all of that. So the New York Times article came out, and there was a photo of me in class, and next to my, everybody's age was there, and next to my name it said Laverne Cox, parentheses, over 21. So, girl, for many, many, many years, I have never, ever, ever said how old I am. I've never confirmed or denied my age, and so much of that was about the story that I told to myself about age and aging. Part of the one element of the story was that after a certain age, I'm no longer dateable, I'm no longer effable, and I'm no longer hireable. That was part of the story, and I was like, okay, if they want to hire an actress over 30, then I'll never be over 30. Perfect. And then you kind of get a little famous, and at one point, I think there are still 3 ages on Google for me. I think that is the case. But eventually, my real age sort of comes out, and it starts being used in articles, but I'm still in sort of this denial about it. I still haven't like confirmed or denied it. So because I haven't confirmed or denied it, it's not real in my mind. So this is the story I'm telling myself. And the interesting thing is, when I turned 40 in 2012, I had been acting for a very long time, but I hadn't really gotten anywhere in my career. I was thinking that I haven't worked in years. At that point, too, I was also in rent arrears for my apartment. I had an eviction notice back in February of 2012, so I was on a payment plan to avoid being evicted from my apartment. I was now 40, and actresses don't really work after 40. So I was like, I have to do something else. And so I decided I was gonna stop acting, and I was gonna go to graduate school. I bought GRE study materials at a discount from a friend, and I started doing research on graduate schools, and I thought this is the smart thing to do. It's time for me to get a real career and let this acting thing go. And then in August of that year, my agent calls me and says, there's an audition for this new web series, and I think there's a part for you. You should go on an audition. I was like, well, I think I'm done with acting. He was like, do the audition, see what happens, And I went to the audition, and it was for a television show called Orange Is the New Black. I got the part, and I got the part, and by episode 3 of the show was my character Sophia Bursett's backstory that we shot. And even though I was on a day rate, I got so much over doing that episode that I was able to pay my back rent from all the way back from January, and then I paid my rent 6 months in advance, and. But I was just happy to have a job acting, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I can wait to go back to grad school. Maybe something will happen with this show. And 2 years after I decided to give up acting, that my time was up as an actress, 2 years later, on my birthday in 2014, the cover of Time magazine with me on the cover was revealed. And the day before that, I got a Critics' Choice nomination for my work in the first season of Orange Is the New Black. And a few months after that, I was nominated for a Primetime Emmy, which you heard earlier makes me the first openly trans person nominated for a Primetime Emmy in an acting category. And I was about to give up. I was about to give up on the dream I had had my entire life. I had this story around, I was too old to do this. I had this story, really, I thought, maybe it was just time to do something else. And then I discovered that the universe had a different plan for me. The universe had a different plan for me. And what the universe had in store for me was way bigger than I had ever dreamed for myself, way bigger. I can't really even believe my life now and the ways in which I get to touch people all over the world through my work as an actress, but also my work as an advocate and just sharing my story. And what I want to say to you about this part of my story is that you might leave here today with very specific ideas about what your path will be, what your future will be, how many years it's going to take, and this is exactly how it's going to happen. And life is likely going to happen, and if you survive, hope God willing you will, things will change and perhaps turn out very differently than you would imagined. And you will get to where you're supposed to be, but you'll have a lot of detours. And what I want to say to you is that don't give up before the miracle. Don't give up before the miracle. And that means just keep trying to figure out how to take the next right action. Courage, leaning into what's uncomfortable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and then getting yourself psychologically and emotionally ready for it when it happens. What's clear to me is that I was not ready to be a superstar psychologically and emotionally when I was in my 20s. I was not ready in my 30s. I am barely ready for it now. But I have done so much work on myself psychologically and emotionally that I can begin to receive the wonderful blessings that the universe has been here to offer me. So doing the foundational work, the work to heal from shame and trauma, the work to fully own who you are and your truths is so crucial to prepare you to be able to receive the blessings that the universe has in store for you. I want to send you away from here today with a lot of love and a lot of hope for tomorrow. We need your innovation, your vision, your wisdom, your courage in the world right now. And you have demonstrated here at Pitzer that you have all of what it takes to create the change that this world needs and to live the dreams that you have held your entire lives. Your time is now. Go forth toward your dream. Thank you so much, graduating class of Pitzer 2019. Go towards your dreams. Thank you.